how do we get everybody into that space so that we're all operating in that same cohesive machine?
You give me a mountain, I'm going to climb it. Like, we're going to take that mountain. But if you don't give me a mountain, I'm just going to break stuff. I like to talk about leadership as a roller coaster. And if you're not freaking scared at some point in that roller coaster, you're playing it safe, you're doing it wrong.
I'd love to hear some of your experiences with some of your bad leaders.
The traffic light, the person who needs so much control that nothing can be moved forward without their input.
What are some of the things that you've seen that you're like, wow, that's admirable. I probably want to take on some of that.
I call it the kitchen cabinet. Who are the 5 to 7 people that are not going to tell you what you want to hear?
If you're new here, welcome. I'm excited that you've joined us. Every single week, I get to sit down with CEOs, leaders, founders, builders who are doing something really fantastic on the planet. They're building a business that's making a difference in other people's lives. And I get the opportunity to sit down and chat with them and learn how they're doing it, the lessons, the failures, the opportunities, and they're going to leave you and me every single week with some nugget, mini nuggets actually, that you can integrate, implement into your business to do the same thing. So I'm glad you're here. Sit back. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Brand Laboratory. I'm Deevo. I'm your host. We are on episode 91 today. Wow. Amazing. Pretty excited to continue the episode after episode. And thank you to all the amazing guests and my producer, Rana and Martina, for helping me put this together. Here's what I know after I've been an entrepreneur since 2010 full-time, I guess. Here's what I know after 16 years of doing the work that I've been doing. The leaders that I work with, the founders that I work with, they have a copious amount of intelligence, a massive amount of ambition, and often I encounter people that still feel stuck, confused, lost, dazed. They've been doing something for years and they still have this sort of nagging feeling deep down inside that there's something that isn't quite cohesively working for them, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to do with any one thing, but at the end of the day, it does have to do, for me, from my perspective, clarity and alignment, right? And so how do you match up what you do with what you love and simultaneously be able to solve a problem for somebody, right? And it's these types of things that keep me in business, and the same thing that keeps my guest in business today. And these are the kind of things that force people to take an honest look at the gap between what you say you want, who you say you are, and what you're actually doing every single day. And I don't think that's necessarily a strategy problem per se. I don't think it's necessarily a clarity problem per se. I think it's a combination of a variety of different things, right? Being able to synthesize your true zone of genius, being able to find a true gap that the market maybe lacks, and then being able to develop a solution that speaks to the type of people you want to work with, right? And so that's what the conversation with my guest today is all about, is that gap. And Bobby, who I'm about to introduce in a second, he approaches it through this idea of structure and systems and execution, where I sort of tend to focus on a little bit more existentialism, if you will, which is identity and story, messaging and expression. But at the end of the day, we're both sort of doing the same thing, different entry points, same destination, right? So let me bring this cat in. His name is Bobby Humes. And like all people, he's doing some really cool shit on the planet, which is the only type of people I bring on the show, right? He's an executive coach. He's a leadership strategist, and he is the founder of BH Consultancy based in Tacoma, Washington, which is just a beautiful state and city if you've never been there. He spent 10 years serving in the United States Army as a combat vet. So, bro, thank you, especially with everything going on right now. Jesus Christ, man, I cannot imagine having to be in that position or your position ever. So, but then he went on to lead human resources at the organizational level, including chief HR officer for the city of Seattle. He has a master's degree in human resource management and an executive coaching certification from the Hudson Institute of Coaching, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a pretty reputable organization. And what I appreciate about Bobby, having met with this individual before and talked a little bit about what we're going to talk about on the show, is that his work is not just theoretical. He's building practical systems for leaders who need to move, who need to make things happen. He works primarily with executives, senior leaders, HR teams, and public sector decision makers, which is an unenviable position, having worked with some policymakers before. I don't know how he does it. I would lose my patience really fast. There's too much red tape in public policy, but somehow the man has the patience to handle it. Anyhow, he has an upcoming book called The Table, which explores trust-centered leadership and what it actually takes to build cultures where people can contribute and belong. Bro, I'm out of breath. Bobby, welcome to the lab.
Deevo, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. Public policy, public sector. I've had some experience working in that space before, and I don't know. I don't have the patience for it. What's the key to that?
I think the key is really seeing the public sector as a place of innovation, right? But innovation that has some sort of framework to it, right? There's policies, there's laws, and there's expectations that the public has about what you're doing with their money, right? At the same time, that creates a great opportunity for a bucket of problem sets that you typically don't get in the entrepreneurial space or in the startup or long-term legacy industry space. So you get to look at these really nuanced challenges, and you get to bring a scrappy mindset to saying, okay, the law says this, the people need this, and our research says this. How do we match and mix that together? But it's a place ripe for the concepts of minimum viable product, right? It's a place ripe for testing, but just doing so in a more accountable way, being able to communicate what and why you're doing it, what you're learning. And I think that I was on a panel many years ago with a bunch of government policymakers, and we were talking about this idea of failure. And what failure actually gives us in the public space is an opportunity to learn, to be, like I said, open and honest about what we're learning, and to innovate our way into some really new concepts. And I've been a part of that through my public career, and now I hope leaders and teams do that in their organization. And you're right, there's red tape, and some people don't like to shift. But that's what we're trying to get folks to do here at BH Consultancy, is to say, you came into this business, this work, to change the world. Like, let's really do that. And it's gonna take you doing your thing a little differently.
Mm-hmm. So you had a pretty comprehensive career. You've worked at some pretty high levels inside organizations. So city government, institutions, executive teams. Are you doing any work with the military?
I'm not doing any work with military right now.
No. What does a leader look like when they genuinely are not aligned, and why does it go undiagnosed for so long?
There's burn out others, right? They create bottlenecks. They create pinch points where creativity can't flow, where the organization can't do its thing. And so when you see a lot of unmet promises, you have a lot of talking heads, but really no value creation. That's when you might have some misalignment. Now, I think what helps those leaders get back into alignment is to get outside of themselves. And that might look like working with a coach. That might look like reverse mentoring, which is something I'm really nerding out on. This idea that the generation that's coming into the workforce has some skill sets and some ways of looking at the world that you and I are probably like, what is that about? But we can learn some nuanced ways of thinking about our technology systems, or how we engage new customers just based on what we learn. So if we can get leaders to slow down, to acknowledge that they need some things, a vacation, a therapist, and get them to broaden their table, right? To invite some new voices to their space so they can be challenged, then we can start to see organizations thrive. But that takes that's a heavy ask for folks who might believe that their primary goal or their primary function in the organization is to be the leader. Whenever I'm in a room, I don't want to be the smartest person in that room. I don't want to have all the ideas, because if that's the case, then I shouldn't be in that room. So,
have you always held that position?
No.
That's that's a learned behavior.
That's a totally learned behavior, man. When I was first a sergeant in the United States Army, I was a jerk. Brother, I thought I knew everything, and if you didn't do it my way, then I was going to figure out every way possible to help you recondition your frameworks. But what I learned over time was that you get way more from people when they know that you care about them. When you work at a pace where you're not just out on a walk by yourself, but you're walking with folks. And oftentimes, I think the higher level attainment of leadership is walking behind people, right? Being able to say, what do you see up there? What should we do about it? right? Really helping everyone see from their porthole, to use like a cruise ship example. What does everybody see across the horizon, and how do you synthesize all that together so that the organization, the team, can really be its best? I took a lot of bumps, a lot of bruises, a lot of missed opportunities, just trying to think that I was the only one who had the right answer.
I want to break that down for a minute because you said walk from behind, and I understand and I appreciate the metaphor. But sometimes you do have to step in front. Would you agree or disagree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can't always. I mean, I understand I understand what you're trying to say, like the analogy of being able to sort of see the purview of everything in front of you. But there are times when you do have to get in the trenches and lead, so that people will step into that space with you.
Absolutely, Deevo. Upstream, you're out in front. What's the vision? Where are we going and why? So that then downstream, we can look at what everyone's seeing. We also need to be in front when things aren't going well, right? When the budget's down and you're still putting money into that project and is not happening, we need to get over this idea of the sunk cost fallacy that, man, if we just keep putting more money into it, it's going to get better. Or we spent X amount of dollars into this idea, we should keep going. No, as the leader, we've got to be the one to say, hey, everyone, I know this doesn't feel good, but we need to say no to that so we can say yes to this over here. And like, that's our job. I think also upfront, upstream, is us bringing in new talent. Like, I think every leader should know who's coming into their organization, even if it's a 15-minute, hey, tell me about you. Because I think the most important thing an organization does on any given day is bring new talent into that thing so that you can keep your thing happening. And so, yeah, I think there are some definite places. And it's like, it's almost like double Dutch, right? It's like this moving tension of where the leader is in positionality to where the team is going.
It's the first double Dutch reference I've ever had on the podcast. Small world. When I was in college, I didn't go home one summer because I just didn't want to go home. And my college hosted the World Dutch Double Dutch Championships, and I worked that whole tournament for like a week. It was really cool, and I was blown away. And I don't know what it is, but man, people have some sick skills. And if you've never seen any double Dutch, like the coordination and athleticism to be able to time and be able to get into that space and hold that, and like multiple ropes coming at you, multiple people, I was blown away. I'd never seen it before, except for maybe on Sesame Street when I was like 10.
And that's leadership, right? Multiple ropes coming at you, timing of things, when you take opportunities, when do you hold back? That's leadership. It should be attention. I like to talk about it, as you can tell, I talk in metaphors. I like to talk about leadership as a roller coaster. And if you're not freaking scared at some point in that roller coaster, you're playing it safe, you're doing it wrong.
Or you're just not self-aware.
Fair.
You're delusional.
Fair.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because you've been around a lot of leadership positions, being in the military, working with civic organizations, working with coaches, working with executive teams, working with HR. You've been surrounded by leaders most of your professional and adult life, right? So there's a lot of good leaders. There's a lot of bad leaders. I'd love to hear some of your experiences with some of your bad leaders, and you don't have to name names, but just some of the things that you learn from watching and observing, being in this capacity that you are, what a bad leadership looks like.
Yeah. Bad leadership looks like making it about you, making it about what you don't like. I had a leader once who kept a list of their pet peeves, and you were expected to know what buttons they didn't like pushed, right? Like, why is that more important than the mission? Like, why are people, not whistling because this guy really hates whistling, and if you whistle, you're out of here? Like, that's weird. So I think it's those leaders who create an environment by which they are the center point. They're not doing double Dutch. They're just throwing darts, right? They are a one person show. Another thing that makes a poor leader is the traffic light. The person who needs so much control that nothing can be moved forward without their input. I wasn't able to attend a football game that I'm the head coach last week. It was our first football game of the season. I'm coaching first and second grade boys, so there's just shenanigans, Deevo. But I wasn't able to be there. But you know what? I got 3 other coaches on my team. And I think that the mark of a good leader, I'm still learning, is that you're able to step away and the thing can still happen without you there. I think poor leadership wants to control every bit of everything, and it really slows things down. I say the third and the more subtle poor leader is the leader who's unable to make a tough decision. I was in my role as the chief HR officer at the city of Seattle. I both work for, at that time, all 16,000 city employees, all of the members of the mayor's cabinet, and at the same time, all of the members of the city council. And my job was to bring them recommendations to solve issues. And sometimes, I'd give them a slate of recommendations, and all of those options suck. Right. And I remember talking to a council member once, and she said, Director Humes, all of these options that you're putting in front of us today are kind of uncomfortable. And I said, Madam Chair, that's leadership. Like that's what we're here to do. Our decisions won't be like, making a Pop-Tart. You just, you push down, you wait for it to get hot, and you serve it. It's more complex than that. It's more the calling of a leader, in my mind, is richer than plug and play. And I think oftentimes what we think of poor leadership is in some of the demonstrable things I talked about, slowing things down, just being a jerk. Often it's the person who just can't do the job and doesn't know that they can't do the job because they're not willing to make hard choices, either because they're people pleasing or because they're scared. And there's nothing wrong with fear, right? It's a human emotion, but how we look at fear and what we allow it to put upon us and have us respond to, or how we respond to it, adds a great deal to the character of that leader.
Have you ever had to confront bad leadership?
All the time, every day.
I had a small story I wanted to share with you about bad leadership, because you talked about making about them. When I was and this is a much younger story. When I was younger, I had just joined the corporate world, and I had to go to the bathroom, and the floor that I worked on, I'm a newbie. I'm like literally just fresh out of college. And the floor that I worked on in a multi-story building, the bathroom was, for whatever reason, was not working. I forget what the reason was. So I didn't know the political nuances of operating in an executive. So I knew that there was a third floor to the building, and there was a bathroom up there because I had been up there before. So I was like, I took the elevator up, and I'm in the bathroom and doing my thing. And as I'm washing my hands, the CEO of the company walks out of the bathroom stall next to me, and he's like, "What are you doing in here?" And I was like, well, "I'm in the bathroom." Like, "What do you think I'm doing here?" He's like, "This is an executive bathroom only." And I was like, "Oh, I did not know." Anyway, make a long story short, I got reprimanded because I had gone up to the third floor where I was not apparently allowed to be, and was using the executive bathroom that I was apparently not allowed to use. And I just remember thinking, I had never been exposed to that sort of environment before, but I just remember thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. It was sort of like, know your place. You don't belong here. You have no business being up here. I just remember thinking, if I was a leader of a company, I don't imagine that I would ever tell my employees that you're not allowed to come to a segregated bathroom that only I'm allowed to use because it's my bathroom. Maybe I would. I don't know. I don't think so. But I just remember thinking that story always stuck with me, because I thought, I always look at situations, right? I'm all about information. Like, everything's information, right? What do you do with it is what really matters, right? I just remember thinking that day, if I was the CEO of that company, would I have done the same thing? And I would like to say wholeheartedly that I would not have ever expressed myself the way that he did to me. Whether you call that bad leadership or good leadership, I don't know what it is, but it's just a small story of like my first exposure to the corporate world and like what leadership looked like to me. So just interesting.
Deevo, it definitely is interesting. What's most interesting to me about that story is what that communicated to you.
Yeah.
I often tell leaders, your leadership is not just who you are as a person, but your leadership goes before you. Before you get there, people are thinking, how's Deevo going to respond to this? And after you leave, they're thinking, like, people take you home to their dinner table with their families if you're a leader. So how you walk down the hall and your affect, it matters. So yeah,
I talk about this in one of my keynotes, and it sort of centers around the idea of positioning and where you are in the eye of your market and the eye of your customer. And I think a lot of, and I see this all the time because I work with people in this capacity. A lot of businesses think, okay, I'm really good at X. This is my zone of genius. And we only operate from that lens, right? And we present to our clients, we train to our clients, we execute to our clients, but we never stop to actually ask, how are they receiving us? How are they perceiving us? Because at the end of the day, it's they who are buying our service, whether you're a coach or a product or you're selling t-shirts. At the end of the day, if we're only looking at it from our myopic lens, we're sort of operating in our own little echo chamber rather than looking at it. What's their perspective of the situation, their perspective of the product, their perspective of what I'm delivering to you? So it's a really good conversation to have around this idea of positioning and understanding how you show up in the world.
Yeah, we call that in my business executive presence. And it is a much like what you're referring to, Deevo, it is a commodity. It's not only something that I hold and can nurture and develop. It's also in the mind of the person who's experiencing me, right? And so, and in that case, I have a limited amount of influence about how they interpret what I'm saying. But I can not be a jerk, I cannot be a bottleneck, and I cannot be a passive leader in space, and that'll help convey some different things if I'm aware enough to understand that presence is always there.
Self-awareness is always such a big baseline for almost literally everything we do, right? Being able to understand how we show up in the world. Where you're sort of going, at least what I'm hearing from some of the stuff that I've heard you drop, really lends itself a lot in the area of our personal values, right? And I know you talk a lot about translating values into operational systems, moving from, and I think the language I read, maybe it was from our conversation, or maybe I just inferred, but moving from aspirational language into sort of measurable culture, right? Does that make sense? Can you walk me through what that actually looks like? Like, what are the specific levers from aspirational language into measurable culture?
Yeah, this is some of the hardest work that we do in my firm, because everyone has that strategic plan. Like people, they do the retreats, and they pay us a good dime to come and help out with the retreat. And I tell them, hey, in 6 months, let's talk again. Because what happens in the retreat is we get really into the creative process, most people, and we like what we say we're going to do, but executing on it takes real work. Because the work of saying the thing and creating all the values and all the goals really comes down to what behaviors inform those values. So who do we, if we say we want to be a best in class, organization that's focused on green spaces, okay, what does that mean, and who cares, right? What are the personas, right? To kind of get into branding and marketing. What are the personas that are impacted by those words, and what do they expect in our behaviors to make that real, right? And here's where people sometimes close me out, but what performance measures help support those behaviors? So we said that the behavior of healthy green spaces is being in community. Love it. What does that look like? Is that touch points with other nonprofits in the space? Is that we're doing an Earth Day because we just celebrated Earth Day this week? Is it an Earth Day function that has some policy tied to it? Like, what are we taking away from the really high level, wordy, binder book that we create our strategic plan on, and how are we moving those into expectations for people, so people are actually conducting work that speaks to behaviors, that speaks to that language? And so now we're putting supervisors and leaders in positions to hold Bobby and Deevo accountable for the outcomes of those behaviors. And that's kind of where it turns into sand for some people, because we don't either have the language or the operational maturity to make sure that we have healthy performance and accountability measures to drive that work forward. I think the organizations that do well at performance management, and it doesn't have to be like, it's the annual cycle. It doesn't have to be that clinical, but we have to have meaningful conversations about what the expectations are for the behaviors we want to see that align to that strategic plan. That's how you actually make it real.
I love that you said what behaviors inform those values, and values are not necessarily defined by intention. I think a lot of people think, okay, if I put it on a piece of paper, then it must be true. But in my experience, one's values are revealed by repetition, right? Show me what someone consistently does, especially under pressure, and I'll show you what they actually value, right? That's sort of what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
In terms of, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, you continue.
No, I was going to say, and to support those behaviors, where are we putting our dollars, right? Where are we investing? That also has some accountability to what we say we want to be.
So in other words, sorry, I just want to sort of get our handle on that. So we're talking about behaviors, and behaviors inform values. Repetition reinforces that. But you're now saying that in addition to reinforcement of behaviors, we're also now saying, okay, where are we spending our money so that we can actually show that what we're pouring our time, energy, and resources into actually is in alignment with our values, our behaviors, and our repetitions.
That's right. Deevo, I've seen so many of my clients say they want to do a great thing, do the work of saying, these are the behaviors, here are the performance targets, but spend their time and their resources doing the same thing that they've been doing before our time. Like, you got to say no to some things so you can say yes to the things that truly matter to you. And that's hard, because that means that the thing we've been doing for the last 10 years, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. I work with a culture coach, and one of the things that she and I were talking about recently is sort of like this idea of these inspirational walls, right? You walk into some of these corporations, and this is a little bit older. I haven't been in the corporation office for a while, but in some of the spaces, they have these like inspirational posters, sitting by the sea, and there's like some mantra on it, and that's all good and well. Like that's one thing to have a poster up there, but actually like living, breathing, tasting, like embodying what that is, it's a whole different thing. And sort of getting an organization to be in full alignment with whatever that mantra is or whatever those values are, or you have these fantastic mission statements and all these sorts of things. Like, it's a thing, right? To be able to get everybody to fall in line. Yeah. In your experience working with organizations, like, what is the fastest, most efficient, most effective way to get your team, to get your staff, to get your culture in full alignment so that whatever it is that you say you want to embody, whatever your values that you put on your mantra board say, how do we get everybody into that space so that we're all operating in that same cohesive machine?
Yeah, here's going back to our double Dutch conversation and that tension that the leader holds. This is the moment where that leader's out in front. We've got to establish a vision. I told one of my bosses once, listen, I'm an Army vet. You give me a mountain, I'm going to climb it. Like, we're going to take that mountain. But if you don't give me a mountain, I'm just going to break stuff. Like, because what else am I here to do, right? So we got to take all that language and the strategy and the behaviors and say, here's how we're going to organize it. And here's what I need this team to do, and this team to do, and this team to do, right? And here's what I'm going to do to make sure that you have what you need to do that thing I'm asking you to do. And when we do this, when we meet our moment, right, it's kind of like Braveheart, right? When we meet this moment, here's what it's going to be for us and our customers and our constituents when we get there, right? We got to set vision. And I think sometimes we think that, all right, I told Deevo what the performance standard was, but you didn't tell him why. You didn't tell him what's it going to be like on the other side of that. And that's so important. And I think some people try that and they do it, and they just do it once and they leave it alone. I like the mantra, we got to do it 77 times, 77 ways. You got to go at that messaging, and you got to tweak that messaging for your different verticals in your organization, for your different teams. You've got to give it to them so it's sticky. You got to say it so many times that they're cutting you off before you say it. That's when you know that you're moving in a direction that's going to be sustainable for the vision that you have that matches that strategic plan. Otherwise, you did the thing, but yeah, go ahead.
I want to challenge you in a bit on that, because I want to sort of get more to sort of the fundamental through line of what Coach Bobby believes. So you have a challenge of an organization that is a top-down model, and you have a leader who believes in X, Y, and Z, but you don't have full culture buy-in from some of your middle management, from your executive management team. And you have a lot of like dissidence going on, if you will. So your challenge with getting this organization in alignment. So without cliches and sort of jargon and all the things, and I'm not calling you out on that, I love that. I'm just simply saying, like, when you're challenged with stepping into an organization, you see some of the bullshit that's actually going on, right? And there's some real bullshit that goes on. What's sort of your methodology? What's your process to really right this ship? You've got a leader who says we want to go this way. You've got most of your team over here in middle management saying we're on board, but then you have a few people who are just sort of outliers that really haven't bought in, and then their teams are being affected by that, right? That's one of the things I see is, like, if you don't have total buy-in, you've got rogues operating, and I think rogues are a necessary evil sometimes because they sort of they innovate, right? They're the people who are sort of like call the bullshit out. But if you have a rogue that is like completely operating on their own in a silo, it's just bad for morale, and other people sort of see that as like they take cues to that. So I'm wondering, like, how do you address those sort of situations?
Yeah, I use inquiry, right? I'm coming in, I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm asking that leader questions. Hey, what shaped your vision? Who'd you shape that vision with? If they shape that vision on their own in their executive bathroom, right? We got a problem. I like to talk about governance a lot. Where are the places in which senior leadership actually hears from middle management? If you don't know what middle management's thinking, then you're a breeding ground for more rogues. And I agree with you. You need those laggards, right? You also need your early adopters. But I'm really focused on the middle with my inquiry design. So who have you worked with to design this vision? What are they actually owning? And then I'm going to take whatever I learned from that leader or those leaders at that C-suite space. I'm going to take that to middle management. And I'm not investigating the C-suite's claims that they've done that work with their middle managers, but I want to know what the middle managers believe about what's happening in the organization. And then I want to take that and synthesize it. I want to analyze that information and get some themes, right? Where is there clear alignment? Where is there sort of broad difference in approach or meaning about what the organization has said? And then we're just going to come back, right, and create some hygiene around things, right? But what I want to create is a back and forth between those leaders at the middle level and at the C-suite level, but that they're having conversations, that they're owning things together. And then with those folks who are just rogues, hey, if that rogue application is making the organization more honest to what it says it's trying to do, great. But if those rogues are in the way, then we have to then say, all right, is this the place where you want to be? Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. It is interesting, sort of like a fine balance. Like you do need people to sort of toe the line, but at the same time, you still want spirited individuals that are willing to sort of ask the necessary questions, point out the critical flaws, and not just sort of be like, "Oh, this is how we do it. This is how we're going to do it." Right. So it is an interesting sort of disposition to be able to target, which is really why it's important to understand your team. You talked about at the outset, understanding who your team is, what type of value do they bring to the table, and then being able to sort of organize them accordingly so that the right people are doing the right things and working towards the right objectives. There's a misconception that you called out, and I think it was in your onboarding forum, or you've named it in your work on your website. I want to explore that a little bit. You talked about this idea that culture work and DEI strategy are soft initiatives. Where does that misconception come from, and what exactly do organizations that have gotten past it really look like and not in theory?
Yeah, I think the misconception has come from a broad miseducation of what diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, however many letters you've placed in your definition of it, like what it actually means. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we've been doing DEIAB for a very long time. It just went under different names. And I don't mean affirmative action. Affirmative action and DEI are not the same thing.
I appreciate that distinction.
Yeah. So when organizations do this well and it becomes a part of their culture, they have just like if we were an engineering company and we're building a bridge. Like we've thought about all the different materials that we're going to need, all the different structures to make sure that this part of the bridge, is going to connect to this part of the bridge, and there's a meaning why we need to traverse this gap. Like all of that is thought about when you're in an engineering project, right? You got accountability structures is all there. The same is true with inclusion and belonging. We're not giving people jobs simply because of what they look like and who they are. We want the best of the best. We want the best and brightest. And we're going to be thoughtful about where we go find these people and invite them to our roles, right? And where there are folks inside our organization, we're going to lean into that. I think about marketing companies a lot. I think about some of the firm that, there's some startup companies. There's a beverage company that I do some coaching for. And one of the things I like to ask them is, what's your current talent? Like who's currently inside your organization, and are they the right people to move up as we think about expansion? Like that's not controversial. That's smart business. You already have somebody in your organization, but sometimes they might be looked at as, well, they're just an admin, so they can't take this on. But those admins are key holders. They know where a lot of stuff is, right? Can they be developed into an operational space? So when an organization is doing this work well, it's thought of in layers. It's not simply what people look like or how they think. It is leveraging who they are in their experience to move the organizations forward based on the strategy and vision that's already been laid out. I called after the murder of George Floyd, and a lot of organizations were just doing all manner of things in the name of DEI. I called what we're seeing now. I called that some of those organizations weren't going to be doing that stuff in another year. I called that it was going to be used as a political football to create division, and I was right. And I'm sad that I was right. The true opportunity for us is to be thoughtful about why we're doing equity work, make it a part of the business. And if there's no need to make it a part of the business, don't say you're making it a part of the business. Now, my soapbox is everyone should make it a part of their business, because why would you want to miss out on talent from anywhere because someone might think differently, look differently, speak differently, believe differently? That's not the America I know and I fought for.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it is an interesting conversation, not just corporately, but politically, religiously, all the different things that are happening right now in this country. And I don't want to go into that rabbit hole because that's a much different conversation. But it is interesting to sort of sit back and just sort of watch and observe the things that are going on right now. And I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of curiosity around what's actually unfolding, but I won't go into there. You said something a minute ago before you finish your last piece, is and centered around this idea of placing the right people in the right positions. I'm curious because I operated in the corporation for 15 years. And what I saw was a lot of political alliances based upon things that weren't structurally sound and zero integrity, and the wrong people working in the wrong positions because they had alignments, et cetera, et cetera. And you can call it whatever you want. Yeah. But one of the things that I observed in 15 years working for the corporation is that the wrong people were in the wrong positions, and it was directly affecting bottom line, revenue, efficiencies, morale, et cetera. But because the corporation did not have a handle on and this is opinion, but they didn't have a true handle on their workforce and the placement of their individuals, and nobody was really willing to shake things up because it's just how we always did things, right? And so you had these alliances of people that should not have been leading in many positions. You had people working for these leaders that were corrosive and toxic to other things in the individual and in the workforce and in the teams and the organizations and the units. And it really just added up to the nonsense and the bullshit. It is one of the reasons I left the corporation, because I'm just like, dude, I cannot work with people like this who are not willing to actually step outside of themselves for a moment for the sake of the organization, rather just they're there for themselves. So how do you manage those sort of things? Like when you go into a toxic workspace and you see that the wrong people are in the wrong positions and that there is these sort of political alliances that are driving the placement of people, like how do you even begin to address something like that?
Yeah, I immediately I call it out with grace and intention, because I don't work there. So I don't have anything. I'm not in the right. I don't have anything to lose in that system. So I might say something like, "Hey."
Well, you do. What if you piss somebody off and there's someone at the top that is in that same space? Like, how do you convince a leader that what they're currently doing is actually toxic and antithetical to the growth of the system?
Now, if it's the leader, we're going to do that in a coaching space.
Yeah, I guess that's what I should have asked. Like, how do you convince a leader that his people or her people are in the wrong place and there's some political nonsense going on that are keeping some of the people in the wrong positions?
If we're in a coaching space, what I want to do is I want them to identify that they have a growth edge around their leadership when it comes to people. If they do that, then I have an opportunity to say, let's grab some data, right? Let's survey your team across these different areas, right? It might be communication, it might be direction, it might be leadership presence, and get some feedback so that you can then structure what plans you want to make any shifts. But I have gone to organizations and experienced people in organizations and told my client, hey, sat in the lobby with Bobby tell me about them. How long have they been here? What's going on? I think you might have a problem on your hands based on what we're doing. Now, this usually happens in a consulting space when I'm brought in to work with, some organizational design element. We just call it out. Like, what are you doing about that? I'm sure you see what I see. When it comes down to it, I think that high school never ends. That people form these bonds and these alliances to the detriment of their strategy. And I think as a consultant, I come in and I say that. Now, if they want to like not work with me anymore because I'm coming in too rough, then that's a gift, because I got other people I can work with. But typically they'll take me up on that and say, well, how do we address it? And then at that time, I'm just a mirror. Well, I start asking questions again. I go back to inquiry. Well, when's the last time you talked to Bobby about his performance? Or, tell me about when you've addressed these things. Now, some of these questions are leading, and sometimes they might say, well, we haven't said anything. Like he's the CFO's brother. All right. So let's imagine what you're communicating to everyone else because he's the CFO's brother and he's a jerk.
Candor, honesty is always the best way, and that's what I'm hearing you saying. Yeah.
Let's just call it out, sit with it.
Not everyone receives that, Bobby.
This is true.
Not everyone is capable of receiving advice. I had a woman once, and I had to learn this the hard way, but I had a woman once tell me, I called her out on some bullshit, and she was like, if I wanted your input, I would have asked you. You should, and she went on to say, like, you should really sort of like hold on to your feedback for people. And before you give feedback, people, you should ask them, are you open for feedback? And I was like, well, it's an interesting position. Like, if you're not open for feedback, then I'm basically just barking up the wrong tree. So I sort of developed this model, and I use this all the time when I hear something going on that I'm like, I'm like you, like I'm really good at sort of seeing the subtleties and nuances and reading between the lines. Sometimes I can't do it for myself, but I can do it really well for everybody else, right? And so I turn to them and I asked, you would like a hug, a heart, or a hand in the situation right now? And so it's really kind of like a cool way to sort of position, and people stop and think, you know what, I just want to hug right now. And I learned this also with my daughters. I have 2 teenage daughters, so they don't always want my advice. Sometimes they just want to hug.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, but I do have one more thought that I heard you say earlier. My work that I do, it really centers around, the beginning part of it at least, centers around this idea of identity and narrative, and really kind of getting to the core of who you are, right? Because my belief is that if you can understand your source code, again, having an awareness around who you are as an individual, right? What do you believe? What are your values? How are you actually living those values? What are the traumas that you've incurred throughout your life that are shaping your perspective and your perception of the world, right? My thought is that if you can get to those spaces and then unpack them and understand what the source code looks like, right? Then you can understand where your gaps are and you can fill those gaps accordingly, right? And so I believe personally that a leader cannot build outwardly until clarity and alignment are achieved inwardly, right? And your work tends to start with structure and execution, which I fully respect. I'm just curious, where do you see what I just explained and how I operate, and where you operate, which is structure and execution? Where do you see those two approaches actually aligning in sort of like a symbiosis?
Well, Deevo, that's my prestidigitation, right? That's my sleight of hand. The client believes that we're focusing on these outcomes, but I'm really focused on who you are. And we start with a series of, again, inquiry. Hey, you want to do strategic plan? Why is this important to you now? I want to dive deep into who that leader is, so that then I can mirror back what I'm hearing, where they are. And then that leads us to conversations about what they truly need in the moment. Oftentimes, folks call me in for strategic planning, some policy work. And based on conversations we have it in our inquiry process, in our intake, what they most need is a group or team coaching for their executives so that they're ready to really do the work downstream of the planning. Right. And so, no, I want to go meta, right? I want to understand who they are. I want to understand what the organization's about, and then let that inform how we go about everything else. So I think we are aligned and knitted well into sort of approach to things.
I think I'd like to do a part 2 podcast with you and just really sort of have a conversation around culture. culture of individuals, culture of corporations, culture of businesses, culture of entrepreneurs, and sort of this idea around mindset and awareness and how it lends itself to sort of building what you really want to build. I don't think there's enough conversations around it. I do see a shift. I'm kind of been playing on LinkedIn pretty heavily for the last 6 months, and I'm starting to see some shifting towards it. But this idea of understanding your identity and the architecture of it and the inflection points of how you show up in the world, I don't think it's a strong enough conversation that people are having. And having done the work on myself, I was my own guinea pig. Like, I was some fucked up things going on in my life. And I realized that those fucked up things were shaping my narrative and how I showed up in relationships, romantically, friendships, client relationships, obligations, as a father, as a partner. And it wasn't until I really started to unpack all of those things and sort of see my gaps and become self-aware of my gaps and actually be willing to admit the gaps that I held, that I started to see the true gains and the things that, and the gains in everything. Again, just like my mental attitude and the way I showed up in relationships, all of it. So I'd love to have another show with you because I know you have a lot of insights on that. Last piece, and this is sort of like one of the things that are near and dear to me. And again, thank you for being here, Bobby. In terms of leadership, because you talked at the beginning of the call on sort of what bad leaders are. What personal leadership qualities do you think are sort of inherently necessary to show up as a good human and a good leader of an organization? What are some of the things that you've seen that you're like, wow, that's admirable. I probably want to take on some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just talked about it in setting up our next conversation, that self-awareness. How you are is who you are, right? As you talked about earlier, person can say anything. I'm going to know who they are by their behaviors, right? So a person who's self-aware, and not just self-aware. I've met leaders who have done the tip of the iceberg and gotten self-aware, but then use that as a crutch to say, well, this is who I am. Like, sorry.
I hate that.
Right? Like, that's not the work, bro. Like, the work is deep. The work is, man, is that helping my relationships? Is that who I really want to be? It's testing and challenging that I'm not done. First day of grad school, get in. The professor writes on the board. She writes, "Never arrive," and I'm like, whew, there's always something to do. There's always deeper to go. So I'm not just self-aware for the point of being self-aware because it's cool. I'm self-aware so I can start doing work. And now that I'm doing the work, really good leaders have surrounded themselves with the type of people who are necessary to help them take that work to the next level. I call it the kitchen cabinet. Who are the 5 to 7 people that are not going to tell you what you want to hear? They're going to tell you what you need to hear. Some of those are coaches. Some of those are faith leaders. Some of those are therapists. But a lot of those are similarly situated leaders trying to do something in this world similar to what you're trying to do. And they don't have time to coddle you. They want you to be your best, and they're going to do everything they can other than commit a crime to help you get to your next level. And so I think taking self-awareness and putting it into action the same way we talked about, values into behaviors into performance is what really, really good leaders are doing in 2026 to make their organizations, make their families, make their communities better.
I love that. Thank you for that description of that. I do want to go back to that never arrive thing because I do have sort of like a duality to that. I appreciate the sense. I appreciate sort of the ethos behind it, but I also would like to challenge whoever that professor was that there is a dangerous side of that duality, if you will, because it can create a permanent sense of insufficiency. It can strip meaning from the growth and the milestones you've already accomplished. It can become a hiding place, right? It can become a convenient excuse to avoid things, whether it's commitment, ownership, defining success, etc. And from my point of view, it has the danger of distorting presence. So it is important to, and I'd like to just sort of real quickly before you jump off, what is that fine line between understanding that you're always growing, you're always innovating, you're always expanding, you're always experiencing, you're always learning, you should always be curious. That's sort of like the good side of never arriving, right? But the duality is some of the things that I just said. And so I don't know what that balance is. I'm curious, what would you say about that?
Man, we're back to double dutch again. Like, it's all balance, right? It's all, I never arrived, but man, I just landed the biggest client I've ever had. I should go celebrate that. Like, that's a milestone, right?
I buy myself a pair of J's whenever I land a new client.
Man, we're too similar.
My closet's getting too big now. I got a new space for my J's.
But it's about living, right? It's not a stoic belief or philosophy. It's truly about saying, I'm a lifelong learner. It's truly about saying, I want this next chapter of my life to be different than the last chapter of my life. Right? It's really being into your life. A lot of us are on I call it autopilot. A lot of us are living on autopilot. Like, what would life look like? Not if you made a big change, but if you made one shift in your business and how you communicate with your staff and how you love your people, that would just be world changing for you and for others. So I think I like your challenge, and it's nuanced with balance.
I love it. I like that you said stoicism, and I do appreciate that perspective because I studied that religiously. But I think one of the things I'm really diving into right now is this idea of this sort of Zen perspective on things. And instead of saying never arrive, they would say you are already here. Now, what are you going to do with that?
Ooh, yeah.
It's kind of interesting, right? Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
Deevo,
yeah, man. Dude, we got a lot of things to talk about. Let's keep this going. I think I would really love to have you back on and have a second conversation, brother. Where is the best place for people to connect with you?
The best place for people to connect with me is LinkedIn at Coach Bobby. Spell Coach, spell Bobby, Bobby, or check us out at our website, BH Bobby Humes Consultants. That's a S at the end. .co, no M on the end. bhconsultants.co. You can check out our portfolio, kind of what we're all about, type of folks that we help, and schedule a discovery call. We just talk a little bit. I'll ask you some questions, and we'll see if we're the right match to work together.
That's brilliant. And all those tags and all those websites and URLs, we're going to have those in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in connect with Bobby, and please do. The through line for my conversation started up around this idea of clarity and alignment. And it isn't something that leaders necessarily discover on their own. And I'm not saying that you can't. I've been in those spaces, but I will say that clarity, alignment, being really understanding of who I am as an individual and how I show up in the world really required me to hire some people, sit with some people who were willing to call me out on my own bullshit. And those sorts of things best emerge, in my opinion, when someone is forcing you to confront the gaps between what they say they want and what they're actually doing. And having a good coach like Bobby in your corner to do that is really going to speed that process along. So, Bobby, thank you for sharing your zone of genius with you, joining me in the lab today. I really appreciate all the insights that you dropped, and it's just been a wonderful conversation. I look forward to doing it again.
It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to next time.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
All right, Deevo. Peace.
All right, that's it for today, folks. Thank you. If this episode hit you, like it, subscribe it, leave a review. It helps a lot more than you think, and it helps the right people find this show and help us keep growing so we can continue to produce amazing episodes. You can find me at thebrandstoryteller.com if you're interested in connecting with me, and everything else about this episode, the guest, the websites, the social media handles, they are all linked below. I'll see you in the next show.